To God be the glory. This is a testimony of trial and triumph. And I want to say, in the words of my former professor, Ravi Zacharias, you are in for a treat as well as a treatment today. Just a little bit about Sherry and me. Sherry was born, the good news, she was born in Ohio, North Canton. And that's the good news. The bad news is I was born a little further north of you, quite a bit further north. And I won't say where, but we got together. Sherry came to know the Lord in the Army. She was in the WACS Women, what is it, Sherry? Army Corps in Monterey, California, and under the ministry of Campus Crusade, she began to understand the gospel and why Jesus came and why he died. So she was baptized in one of the rivers there, and she remembers that, of course. I was born on a Sunday morning, March 14th, 1948. My parents had me in church on Wednesday night. Born on Sunday, in church Wednesday night. I have a pastor friend who testifies. He says, growing up, I had a drug problem. I was drugged to church Sunday morning, drugged to church Sunday night, drugged to church on Wednesday. And that's exactly the way it was for me. I was in a little Sunday school class, Mrs. Lemon, arthritic, crippled, could hardly come in, but she was faithful to that little group of boys, and she explained the way of salvation to us. And then when we understood it a little bit better and were ready to be baptized, we were all baptized on the same night. And it was about that time that I felt that God wanted me maybe to be a pastor, even though I had kind of a stuttering problem and wasn't very articulate at all. But I thought, well, let me pursue that and see what God will do. So I went to a Bible college in New York and then on to Dallas Theological Seminary and thought, well, with God's hand upon me, maybe we can do this. The title, To God Be the Glory. I wanted to advance. Okay, keep on. Oh, there we go. I always begin this testimony with this verse. For those who want to boast, let them boast in the Lord. The old King James says, to him that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. There will be boasting today, but I want you to know it's not about me. I did not even dodge bullets well. So it's all about God. And what am I doing wrong here? There it is. Maybe I don't have it on. And from now on I hit this, right? Okay. I think we'll get through this. I always begin this story, and I've told it to as few as one person, and to as many on radio and on television, and a few years ago, even at John Osteen's church while he was still alive, before Joel took over. Whenever John Osteen would see me, he'd say, you're a miracle, God's a miracle, and come give your testimony. So I was able to do that at the large Lakewood church there. But I always begin with Forrest, who said, life is like a box of chocolates. Help me. You never know what you're going to get. I did not believe that growing up. I had a faulty theology. I felt that because I go to church, because I put in 10% of my little allowance, and because I love God, and because I led my best friend Tommy Osterbeck to the Lord, and he was baptized along with me, I thought, well, naturally things go well in my life. Never had any trouble in school, and never did a lot of the things that some of the other guys did. had wonderful parents, went to college, just no problems at all. So my faulty theology was, well, if you do right, live right, tithe, take communion, everything's going to be a wonderful time. And that was true until I was 34, and I found that there was a change coming. By the way, before I tell you that, let me tell you who some of my neighbors were in Bedford Hills, New York. Regis Philbin there and his family. We'd often see Regis going through the little IGA store, looking very carefully at the prices, didn't want to be overcharged. And so we knew Regis. We went down many times to his program there in New York City. And, well, Chevy Chase was one of our neighbors, too. He lived right near the high school where my kids went to school. And, by the way, that movie is something we always have to see at Christmas time with the kids, now grown. Chevy Chase, Christmas Vacation. Clark, it's the gift that keeps on giving all year long. You remember that. Well, Superman lived around the corner from us, too. Chris Reeve. And one of my favorite movies he starred in, Somewhere in Time, with Jane Seymour. One of the beautiful, wonderful movies. Martha Stewart, you know, someone said behind every smile there's a set of teeth. And she wasn't well loved in our community. She had 160 acres there, and when Halloween came, she'd chase the kids off her property. But she lived there. Robert Redford had a summer home in Bedford Hills. The policeman loved to give him tickets for speeding around town, and but he was able to live through that. My next door neighbor, her property touched ours. How many of you remember Jennifer O'Neill? Jennifer O'Neill was the one who starred in the movie Summer 42. Do any of you remember that movie or have heard of that? Sure. She was cover girl forever. She starred with John Wayne in a number of movies. By the way, these people never came to my church. These movie star type, no, we'd see them, we'd say hello, but that was about it. Well, where was Bedford Hills? You know, New York City, Manhattan, is way down here, but 50 miles north is Bedford Hills. And some of the men of our church and the women would get on a train in Bedford Hills and go an hour all the way down to Grand Central Station. Then they had to get a subway or a cab to wherever they were working. And then at the end of the day, they would just reverse the process to get back home. And, you know, Wednesday nights, they'd still drag their tired body into our Wednesday night service. But Bedford Hills was right next door to the international headquarters of IBM. So my first Sunday at that church, and I was there for 10 years, they said, you know, you're going to have to wear wingtip shoes every service. You will always wear a white shirt and a tie, and we expect. So I was there. We saw some real things happen during that time. I want to also say at this point, these were my girls, our girls at the time, ranging in age from 2 years old till 10. And so when the shooting occurred, you can imagine how news hit them of their daddy. What happened? Our littlest one, Lisa, there, 2 years old, she just told her friends, Daddy got shoot. Daddy got shoot. That's all this poor little girl knew. This was the church, Bedford Hills Community Church, and this is where people prayed for me. Back this up just a little bit. Okay, I think we're right there. This is where it happened, September 24th, 1982. This is my study, and I had just finished the last words on a sermon that I had intended to preach on Sunday. There was a knock at the door. I opened the door, and I got a glimpse of the man. He didn't seem agitated or angry in any way. And then is when I felt the first of 3 bullets that would enter my body. The first one was in my abdomen area, and that took me to the ground like a freight train. And that's all I remember, but he discharged all the chambers, and another bullet to this side of the abdomen, and then I must have fallen forward, and a third bullet to the head, which bullet went into the brain, and it happened right there. That's a picture of what this .22 Magnum bullet looked like. Incidentally, I had $80 on me. He didn't take it. He didn't take anything. And as I said, he wasn't agitated. He just calmly and coolly came in to the office. Do you remember a number of years ago, Gabby Giffords, the Congress lady who was at a rally in Arizona, and a gunman shot and killed about 8 people. 1 bullet hit her in the head, into the brain, and you'll remember that she lived, but shortly after that, she finally resigned her position there as a congresswoman. People say that the reason she even lived was because it was in a shopping center where this rally was taking place, and they got her to the hospital real quick, and they were working on her, and she lived. On the other hand, this is how she looks today. However, as I understand it, she does not have a fluency of speaking. She'll speak a word or two, and that changed her life. On the other hand, the police think I must have bled on the floor for probably 45 minutes before I somehow got up, and I use the word somehow, and out to the road. I was there, and I had a conscious moment where I said, "Dear God, something terrible has happened. I don't know what. I feel blood. I can't see it." I didn't realize that I'd be blind for 3 days. And so I said, "God, I think I'm dying, and dear God, if that's the truth." And then I panicked a little bit. I said, "If I'm dying, Lord, I sure hope you remember that I learned about Jesus when I was 6 years old, and when I was 12, I was baptized with my buddies, and you remember that, please." And it's interesting what I didn't pray. I didn't say, "Lord, I have a church, they need me, I have a wife and 4 kids, please, I need to live." No, I only cared about God remembering when I came to know Christ as Savior, and of course my baptism. The next thing I found out, I was in the front seat of a woman, a Jewish woman, neighbors with Bill and Hillary Clinton, by the way. She was coming home from the country club. She said, "I usually play 18 holes, but today something told me let's just do 9. And so she came down this country road, and there I was at the road, but she claimed someone else was there with me. She said, "This beautifully dressed black man brought my car to a stop and got the wounded minister in the front seat. And I don't understand why he didn't help me, a 66-year-old lady, get this wounded minister to the hospital." And that was her story. She wrote the article for Reader's Digest just the way I told it. She said, the minister was helped, and I don't know why this man didn't help me. I raced him to the hospital the best I could. God has things planned and prepared. These were the doctors who attended me at Northern Westchester Hospital. And by the way, this was in September, the high holy days for Jewish people, when all good Jewish doctors go to we call them the Jewish Alps over in Pennsylvania. But on the left, there was Dr. Stephen Greer. He spent 12 years in Vietnam doing nothing but addressing bullets to soldier boys' abdomens. And so when he saw me and they opened me up, I'm sure he thought, well, I've been here before. I think I can handle this. The next doctor, Dr. Lanson, was chief neurologist in Westchester County, and they debated where they would work on me first. Dr. Lanson wanted to take a CAT scan of my head, my brain area, to see where the bullet went in, where to drill in, how to get the bullet. And so, as I understand it, there were two teams of doctors working on me. Down here, peritonitis was spreading through the body, and up here, I was bleeding, and so I was on the table for about 7.5 hours. But certainly God had these doctors ready for me. Dr. Greer, of course, was in the MASH unit in Vietnam. Well, the papers got busy, the New York Post, pastor shot in church, and not that I was famous or that the church was well known. It's just that it happened in Westchester County, Bedford Hills, New York, and that's what brought the attention to this whole thing. They told me that they gave me 9 pints of blood, and I understand that the adult male human body only holds about 12, so I was a little low, and they gave me that. And then the church began to pray. This was Bedford Hills Community Church, and they began to pray and pray and pray. And within the next 2 days, it was discovered that, in fact, I was blind. The bullet not only interfered with my hearing capabilities, but I would be blind. The doctors turned my head to the light of the window. Do you see anything? No, I don't. And they said, well, as we suspected, you are blind. Remember the story in Mark chapter 8 where Jesus saw the blind man, and Jesus touched the man, and the man said, well, I see a little bit. I see men as trees walking. Not very clear, Jesus. And then Jesus touched him again, and he began to see clearly. And that wonderful story tells me that God kind of healed me, my eyesight, in stages. I was getting a little bit back. And today, as I stand before you, the only problem I do have is lower left quadrant in each eye is blind. That's why I don't see someone reaching out to shake my hand. I don't see there. That's why I'm a little clumsy, very clumsy. And but I relearned how to drive to compensate for what I was missing. So I was in the hospital just thanking the Lord that he did that. Now that I have a little bit of eyesight, the police said, well, who did this to you? I said, I don't know. I never saw him before. They gave me a photo spread. They said, does anybody look familiar? I said, I don't know, maybe this guy here. And they said, well, something interesting happened about noon when you were shot. A call came into Bedford Hills Police Department, and the voice said, the minister's been shot. You better bring an ambulance, is the way he pronounced it. Ambulance. Bring an ambulance. And so when I picked his picture out of the photo spread, they said, that looks like Danny Johnson is the one behind it. And so what they did is they called him on the phone and engaged him in a subsequent conversation to get the voice pattern. And now they have 2 tape recordings, the one at noon and now the one they just recorded. They sent the tapes to the FBI, Washington, D.C., and the FBI said the prints match. It's the same guy. So we said to the district attorney, we've got our man. We know he did it, but we don't know why he did it, but that's the guy. But the district attorney said, no, that doesn't prove that he pulled the trigger. It only indicates that he was aware that a crime had been committed, and he called it in. And then he begins to attend the Baptist church nearby, and I called the pastor on the phone. I said, Ray, we think that's the guy. Be careful. Ray said, he's here on Sundays. He's here on Wednesdays. He seems to be liking the Christian message. We don't think it's him. I said, well, Ray, just be careful. So anyway, I'm in the hospital bed, and I need to ask the Lord why. This didn't take God by surprise. Jesus didn't turn to the Father and say, look what happened to Bob. No, it didn't take them by surprise, but it took me by surprise. And so I asked the question, why? And by the way, whenever you ask why, never do it with the fist raised. I was like this. I said, dear God, why? And I began to think. I said, Lord, am I a Jonah, maybe, running away from your will, and so this happened? Or am I a Job? And if I am, help me to take the position, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I really don't know who I am and why I'm here. So I confessed every sin back to the year 1948, and I figured, well, I'm not there because of sin particularly. And so I said, well, Lord, I'm just going to bear under this and be a good soldier. Now, my assistant pastor came into my room. He said, Bob, I retrieved the last page of the sermon that you had written for Sunday. Do you remember what your sermon was going to be? I said, well, I think it was on Romans chapter 1. The just shall live by faith, and I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it's the power of God unto salvation that everyone believes. I said, I think that's what I was talking about. He said, well, I brought in that last sheet of paper, and you might be curious to see what your last words were. There's blood over those last words. We're saved by faith. We must live by faith, not knowing what the next minute holds, but knowing who, capital W, holds the next minute. And we often sing that chorus, I know not what my future holds, but I know who holds my future, and he holds my hand. I looked at that, I said, I can't believe that. Because when I wrote that last sentence, I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. It was just something I had learned, that God holds my future, he holds your future, he holds my hand, period, sermon done, go home, play with the kids. Never had an idea the truthfulness of that and how close something might be to my life. So here I am in Northern Westchester Hospital. And you know how things sometimes get worse before they get better? They don't know for sure who shot me. And all of a sudden, my next door neighbor, Jennifer O'Neill, the movie actress, is shot. She's on my floor. So the police went to my wife, and they said, we have to ask you this question. Did you shoot both your husband and Jennifer O'Neill? And why? Well, neighbors, they're exactly the same age. We were both born in 1948. She was January, I was March. And maybe something was going on and you discovered it, shot them both. My wife said no. Once they asked Billy Graham's wife, do you believe in divorce? And Mrs. Graham said, no, but I do believe in murder. So, but they had to ask that question. And so here's Jennifer. She won't come to my church, but she's on my floor. Now, I need to tell you that my top gift, we all have gifts, the Bible tells us. And I think in the first couple days of heaven, the Bible verse says we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Now that's not judgment as to whether you get in heaven or not. You're already there. So that particular judgment talks about not so much the reward of heaven, but rewards in heaven. What rewards are you going to get? Well, my top gift is evangelism. Not so much preaching, not so much but evangelism, that's my passion. So I'm in a bed thinking, maybe I'm supposed to witness to her, and maybe some of these other movie people and wealthy people will get saved, maybe because of her testimony. So I began to think. By the way, the Inquirer came out. You folks get that every week, don't you? Here. I'm Jennifer, my nightmare life, how I survived. Notice the next line, the day I shot myself. Well, what happened? She got in a fight with her husband who was molesting their daughter. She pulled out a gun, presumably to shoot him. It went off and it inflicted a wound on her. She almost died through that thing. But anyway, I'm thinking, all right, I'm supposed to witness to this gal. So I begin to write a little note. The nurse takes it down to her room. She writes back saying, well, thank you for thinking of me. I said, I'm praying for you. And then I thought, well, let's keep this note thing going. Maybe we can get her saved. Well, that was about the end of it. She didn't respond anymore. But I thought, well, at least, I tried. We'll see what God does. Interestingly enough, the paper said Jennifer O'Neill's shooting had absolutely no connection with the September 24th shooting of Bedford Hills minister Robert Butler. And that's the truth. There was just no connection there at all. The day came when they were going to release me from the hospital. And they said, first of all, no sermons, please. But we do need to tell you that we really didn't do that much. We just, in a perfunctory way, opened you up and sewed the intestines back together and did whatever. By the way, they said the bullet kind of zigzagged through the brain. And the doctor said, the brain has the consistency of Jell-O. There's nothing that's going to make a bullet fragment turn and twist. But this, we've had the x-ray right here. We have the CAT scan. Man, it was like a miraculous progression of that bullet. And it stopped 1 centimeter from the major cortex of the brain. So we did the best. We got the biggest piece. But there are multiple metallic fragments throughout your brain. Therefore, never take an MRI. The magnets will pull those fragments and you will die. So I wear a little thing here that says no MRI. But they said now, don't thank us and no sermons, but we could take 1,000 people just like you. And there's no way you could walk out of here. But we do need to tell you, you're going to have some problems. We did have to discard about a teaspoonful of your brain. We couldn't save it because of the fragments there. So we need to tell you, don't hurry to get back to the church. You're going to have problems. The part of the brain deals with memory and with sequential thinking. You're not going to be able to write a sermon very easy to understand what do I say first, what do I say next, the sequence. You're not going to have that ability, and you won't have any long-term memory. You won't remember the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, I wanted to show God strong, and I wanted to get back much sooner than they wanted me to. I just wanted to say, God is stronger than this. And I'm here to tell you that God is stronger than anything the devil puts against us. So I got my sermon notes together. I was going to conclude with these last words. And halfway through, I began to quote a very familiar verse that I had known all my life. Galatians 2:20, I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but. And I couldn't remember how it went. And I saw the congregation, they took a collective sigh because they knew that was a possibility. And I thought, dear God, maybe this is the end of the line as far as being a pastor is concerned. And so, but I need to tell you that within 2 weeks, honestly, God reconnected whatever was disconnected. And I haven't had 1 second's worth of long-term memory in all these years, and goes back to 1982. So to God be the glory there. People ask me, Bob, what did you learn through all of this? And so when I tell the story, I come up with 4 little things that I learned. By the way, I wish I would have trusted God a little bit more when I finally got home. Before I would get in the car to go to the church, I'd look out the window to make sure nobody's behind the tree, because he hadn't been convicted yet. And we didn't know for sure it was Danny and why he would shoot me, why anybody would. So the first lesson I learned is tragedy will either make you bitter or better. You know, Beethoven, the musical artist, when he discovered he was losing his hearing, if you can imagine that, how do you write music, losing your hearing? Beethoven said, I will take life by the throat. I'll take life by the throat. And sometimes we have to do that too and say, you know, this is going to make me bitter, and I can be bitter the rest of my life, or I'm going to be better through this. Some of you have faced incredible trials. A son who dies, talking to one of your members this morning, a divorce, a financial reverse. You face that. You're facing that. Is it going to make me bitter or better? By God's grace, it can make you better. It can make you bitter. Yeah, it's frustrating. You get upset. I don't see well. I almost fell right down here going back to the seat because I just don't see down here very well. And, you know, that makes me, you know, disappointed and a little bit angry at myself. But tragedy will make you bitter or better. That's the first lesson I learned. And the second lesson is this. If you know who, capital W, you don't really have to ask why. You know, all I knew for sure was the who, the capital W, the God that was in my life. I knew him. I knew he loved me. I knew that nothing would happen that wasn't part of his will. And so if you know who, you don't have to ask why. You'd certainly like to know why this happened. And to this day, I don't know why he shot me. He did make a statement that I'll show you in a minute, but I don't know. So for some of you today, you don't know why some things are happening in your life, but thank God you can hang on to that thread, that you know who, nevertheless, through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. Some of you could have written that hymn. And you know who, and you don't always get to know why. Third lesson, God never wastes his object lessons. You say today, God is making a mockery out of my life. I was divorced. I lost a very important job. A son died. God never wastes his object lessons. Moses, what's in your hand? Moses said, well, you know, a stick, a rod. And God said, well, it doesn't look like much, but we're going to do some pretty incredible stuff with that rod. We're going to bring water out of the rock. We're going to part the Red Sea. It's not just a stick. And God would say to me today, Bob, what's in your hand? You're not a well-known pastor. Your church is just an average church. And you're pretty average yourself, Bob. So, Bob, what's in your hand? I say, well, Lord, you gave me this story. I didn't sign up for this. I wouldn't want it to happen again, but I do have this testimony, and I think people can get saved by it. And folks, I want to tell you, it's so easy for me to tell this story. For you who try to witness, it's hard because you can't walk up to somebody and say, you see this Bible verse? It's hard. You have to wait for the opportunity. I don't need to do that. First day in town, came to the post office. The lady said, well, how do you think you like living here in Mount Gilead? And I had it all planned. Well, I think I like it a lot better than where I came from. Oh, why was that? Well, I was shot writing the sermon. So now they're hooked. They're brought into this. And you just tell the story. You tell how that at the road you had a conscious moment. Dear God, please don't forget, I'm saved and baptized. And so they hear the story. They hear the story. And you're not particularly pointing it down, but they hear the kind of a prayer I made. So I want to say to you, God isn't going to waste his object lesson. What's in your hand? God protects his children with angels. Some theologians think there are 100 million angels. They protect us. These are my daughters, our daughters today. I had the privilege of baptizing each one, and they each have 2 kids, and their 2 kids know the Lord, and I flew down to Dallas a few weeks ago to baptize a little 7-year-old. So they're getting saved and baptized. And but what about Esther Miller, this Jewish lady that rescued me? Every September 24th, on the anniversary of the shooting, I'd take her to lunch. And I'd say, Esther, I was saved spiritually by a Jew, but physically by a Jewess. You saved me. Oh, man, I wish I could give you something. Well, Bob, I have everything. I don't need. I said, no, I wish I could give you Jesus. She said, Bob, I can't. I'm Jewish. I said, I know. Next year we'd go out, have lunch again. I'd do the same thing. I wish I could give you Jesus. Bob, I love you. Yes, I saved you. But I can't. I said, I know. I just wish I could. Well, on her 90th birthday, she, by the way, she keeps telling the story about this nicely dressed black man that brought her car to a stop, and I can't understand why he didn't help me. It finally dawned on me to say this, Esther, I was blind, I couldn't see, I could hear. I think it was just you, me, and the road, but you claim you saw this nicely dressed black man. I said, I don't know, Esther, maybe you saw an angel. I didn't. I was blind, but you keep insisting that, and there were no people of color in Bedford Hills, Westchester County, but that's just a picture I got out of Google. That's really not anybody. But so I said, Esther, the Bible says angels are the ministers to the heirs of salvation, and I'm one of those heirs. And by the way, even in Jewish theology, you folks believe in angels, and so maybe you saw an angel. And that really freaked her out. On her 90th birthday, she said, Bob, you know where I live? Just past Bill and Hillary's house, and I'm down the road, and I'm ready to talk if you can come to my 90th birthday. So I drove all the way from Columbus, Ohio to New York, and we sat down on that couch. Behind the couch is the Hudson River, a great place for a baptism. And so I said, Esther, let's just talk about things you know. Cain and Abel. Abel brought blood. Abraham and Isaac, offer your son. No, wait, here's a ram caught in the thicket. The Lord will provide. The Passover, the blood on the doorpost and the lintel. I said, Esther, what's the common denominator with all of this, lamb and blood and substitution? She said, well, that's just it, lamb, blood, substitution. I said, well, that's John 1:29. Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. And she said, well, I guess that makes sense. So at age 90, there's a new name written down in glory. Her whole family ostracized her. They wouldn't talk to her. Some Jewish people literally have a funeral for someone that goes to the Christian side. So it's just Esther and me and a few Christian friends that tried to help her along in the Christian life. She lived to be 99. And we're going to see her in glory. What about this guy? I warned my friend in this other church, be careful, we think it's him. What happened, he did a plumbing job for one of the girls in the church. raped her, murdered her, put her in his trunk. The police caught him dumping her body in the woods. They brought him to trial in White Plains, gave him 32 years to life sentence. And in connection with that, they said, "Are you also going to admit that you shot the minister?" He said, "Yes, I don't know him. I was so drunk that day, I don't even remember getting into the church." So that's the story on him. That's when we were first married. We looked good back then. We gave this testimony at Osteen's church. Jennifer O'Neill, she calls me on the phone about 10 years ago. She said, "I want to have dinner with you and your wife in Cincinnati." "You do?" "Yeah." We met her for dinner. She looked across the table and she said, "I know what you were trying to do in the hospital. You were trying to get me saved. And all I cared about was men, movies, and money. I wasn't ready, but I went back to California, got saved under the ministry of Jack Hayford and other people, and I know what you were trying to do." So folks, keep casting your seed. Never give up. 24 fruitless years witnessing to Esther. And finally, you just want to say, I give up. She's not going to do it. Keep on, keep on, keep on. Jennifer went on to write 2 books, From Fallen to Forgiven and Surviving Myself. Oh, man, you won't believe these books. She's more than just a Hollywood Christian. She's got the real thing. She goes to large churches on weekends like David Jeremiah's, and it tells her story, how that she's really walking with the Lord these days. That's as close as I ever got to her. Sherry took the picture. Forrest Gump, you never know what you're going to get. Well, you don't, but you know, that makes me want to be prepared. And I always conclude this talk by asking a question. Can you folks maybe cycle back to a time in your life when, like me, at the road, I said, "Dear God, don't forget, I know Jesus. I was baptized." Can you folks cycle back to a time like that in your life? And if not, today's a good time to take that first step. So folks, I just pray that you will continue to cast your bread upon the water. Ecclesiastes, you'll find it after many days. Never give up, never give up. And use the recording of this meeting here to give to your friends. I don't know if it's videotaped or not. It is. You could just say, "Hey, we had this guy at our church. He gave an amazing story. I want you to hear it." Well, they'll hear the story, but they'll also hear the gospel. They'll hear it 2 or 3 times. Many people have come to the Lord just by that. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for a wonderful leading us today. And I'm a little jealous. Eric and Annette have a wonderful church, wonderful congregation. And I'm glad to be here today. And your former pastor brother, you might want to conclude our service today. I would say if you cannot cycle back to a time in your life, today is a good time to start talking about Jesus, start talking about baptism, what he can do for you. To God be the glory. Thank you.